From name-calling, to backstabbing, to full-blown political sabotage, these are the US presidents who secretly hated each other. With feuds so personal, they literally shaped the course of American history. 'Cause if you thought dirty politics started in the last decade, then you haven't heard about the Founding Fathers, who went from freedom-fighting bros to sworn enemies in the blink of an eye. Because John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were a part of the original Dream Team. Together, they wrote the Declaration of Independence, debated philosophy over wine in Europe, and dreamed up a future of America. Until 1796, when Adams and Jefferson both ran for president. And as you can imagine, things got ugly. 'Cause Adams won, with Jefferson coming in second, which under the Constitution at the time meant Adams became president and Jefferson became his vice president. Yeah, imagine having your biggest political rival as your number two. Tensions were sky high. By the time the 1800 rematch came around, the gloves were off. Jefferson's supporters, including his hired attack dog James Callender, went for blood, calling Adams, and I quote, "a hideous hermaphroditical character which is neither the force of a man nor the gentleness of a woman." Oh snap! But Adams' team fired back, branding Jefferson a mean-spirited, low-lived fellow. These two were smearing each other left and right. Except this time, Jefferson won, and Adams was so upset he snuck out of DC at 4 a.m. on Inauguration Day, becoming the first president to skip his successor's ceremony. Talk about a sore loser. But why so much hostility? Well, Adams felt betrayed by Jefferson's behind-the-scenes scheming, and Jefferson saw Adams' alien and sedition acts as authoritarian overreach. So their friendship, dead. Their working relationship, non-existent. And their rivalry, a defining moment in early American politics. Until years later, when they made peace through letters, rekindled their friendship, and even died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the declaration they once signed together. So at least these two buried the hatchet before they died. Unlike this next rivalry, who literally got someone killed. Because if you thought the first Adams had drama, wait until you meet his son, John Quincy Adams, whose rivalry with Andrew Jackson was one of the nastiest feuds in American history. In 1824, there were 4 major candidates running for president: Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, William H. Crawford, and Henry Clay. But Andrew Jackson won the popular vote and electoral vote. So he's the next president, right? Wrong. He didn't hit the majority needed to win. According to the 12th Amendment, if no candidate gets over 50% of the electoral votes, the decision goes to the House of Representatives. So Henry Clay, who was the current Speaker of the House, threw his support behind John Quincy Adams. And when the House voted, they handed the presidency to Adams, who turned around and made Clay his Secretary of State. That's kinda shady if you ask me. Jackson's supporters went ballistic, screaming, "corrupt bargain." And Jackson was convinced that Adams stole the presidency from him. So what did he do? He spent the next 4 years plotting his revenge. Because in 1828, the rematch was pure political blood sport. Adams's camp painted Jackson as a violent, illiterate thug and went after his wife Rachel, calling her a bigamist and a Meanwhile, Jackson's team clapped right back, accusing Adams of being a pimp who procured prostitutes for the Russian Tsar. Yeah, this was no longer politics. It was a high society knife fight. But when Jackson finally crushed Adams in 1828, guess what Adams did next? He followed in Daddy's footsteps and refused to attend the inauguration. So Jackson, he threw open the White House doors and let a mob of supporters storm inside for a rowdy inaugural party, probably just to spite the guy who ghosted him. But here's the tragic twist of it all. Andrew Jackson's wife Rachel died just weeks before he took office, and Jackson was devastated. blaming the vicious campaign attacks for her death. At her funeral, Jackson said, "May God Almighty forgive her murderers. I never can." This wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. And this feud literally split the Democratic-Republican Party for good, giving birth to the modern two-party system. But if you thought that split was bad, let's fast forward to the post-Civil War era, a time when America was on life support, and two of its most powerful men couldn't agree on how to fix it. Because after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, VP Andrew Johnson was promoted to the top job. And unlike Lincoln, he wanted to go easy on the South, offering pardons to former Confederates and fast-tracking their return to power. But Ulysses S. Grant, the Union's most legendary general, sided with Congress and demanded a tougher Reconstruction to protect the rights of newly freed Black Americans and prevent the old Southern elite from regaining control. Johnson and Grant were supposed to be allies, but ended up in one of the most hostile presidential beefs in history. Because things got juicy when Johnson wanted to fire Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a staunch ally of radical Republicans. The problem was, Stanton refused to leave, and Congress had passed the 10-Year of Office Act, making it illegal to remove a cabinet member without Senate approval. So Johnson looked for a workaround and asked Grant to temporarily replace Stanton as Secretary of War. Grant reluctantly agreed, but when Congress pushed back, Grant backed off and gave the office back to Stanton. Andrew Johnson went nuclear and published a scathing public letter accusing Grant of breaking his word, defying the commander-in-chief, and acting with disrespect and insubordination. Translation: the president just tried to throw the most popular war hero in America under the bus. But Grant wasn't having it. He fired back with his own letter, calm, factual, and flat-out contradicting Johnson's version of the events. He defended his integrity and made it clear he wasn't Johnson's pawn. By the time Inauguration Day 1869 rolled around, Grant was ready to take the oath as Andrew Johnson's successor, but their feud was beyond repair. 'Cause Grant refused to ride in the carriage with Johnson. So what did Johnson do? He pulled an Adams move and skipped the inauguration entirely, staying in the White House signing meaningless documents just to avoid his successor. But this wasn't just petty drama. It had real consequences. Their feud was about the soul of Reconstruction. Johnson wanted to go easy on ex-Confederates, while Grant wanted justice, protection for freedmen, and real change. And when Grant finally took office, he led the most aggressive phase of Reconstruction, using federal troops to fight the KKK and enforce civil rights. So yeah, their feud didn't just make headlines, it shaped the future of a nation. But that's nothing compared to this next breakup, which was so dramatic, it could have won an Oscar. Because Theodore Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft weren't just political allies, they were genuine friends. Teddy handpicked Taft as his successor in 1908, believing Taft would carry on his progressive legacy of fighting monopolies, expanding conservation, and protecting labor rights. But once in office, Taft started drifting right by siding with conservatives, firing Teddy's allies, and undoing Roosevelt's legacy. What the heck, man? Teddy understandably felt betrayed, like his best friend was stabbing the progressive movement in the back. So by 1912, Roosevelt wasn't just annoyed, he was furious. He came out of retirement to challenge his own hand-picked successor for the Republican nomination. And oh boy, did the gloves come off. Roosevelt roasted Taft publicly, calling him a puzzlewit, and said he has less brains than a guinea pig. He also called Taft a flub-dub with a streak of the second rate in him. Just brutal. But Taft, who's normally pretty mild-mannered, finally snapped and fired back, calling Roosevelt a honeyfuggler. Yeah, a honeyfuggler. It's old-school slang for someone who sweet-talks you while totally lying to your face. Americans had to check the dictionary to figure out what just happened. But Roosevelt was so enraged, he ditched the Republican Party entirely starting his own third party, the Bull Moose Party, just to take down Taft. His hatred ran so deep, he was willing to hand the presidency to a Democrat. And that's exactly what happened, because Woodrow Wilson won in a landslide. But here's the wild part. Roosevelt actually beat Taft in both the popular and electoral vote. Taft only carried 2 states, an absolute humiliation for a sitting president. So Taft was devastated. Friends apparently saw him break down in tears, heartbroken that his former best friend had turned him into a national punchline. From hand-picked successor to bitter enemy, from hugs to honeyfunklers. This beef wasn't just legendary, it reshaped the Republican Party forever. But best friend betrayal is one thing. An outright sabotage during a national emergency? That's a whole nother level. Because in 1932, the Great Depression was crushing the country. Banks were collapsing, unemployment was skyrocketing, and bread lines were stretching around the block. But in the middle of it all, you got the outgoing president and the man about to take his place who absolutely despise each other. Herbert Hoover, the Republican incumbent, saw himself as a serious, principled leader trying to hold the country together. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the charismatic Democratic challenger, was promising bold new ideas, and Hoover hated every minute of it. Hoover sneered that FDR was a chameleon on plaid, meaning Roosevelt changed his position so often, even a Scottish kilt couldn't camouflage him. And FDR came back swinging, calling Hoover a fat, timid capon. Translation, a capon is a castrated rooster. So FDR basically called the sitting president a fat, cowardly chicken. Yeah, the insults were a little bit different back then. But the real drama came after the election, when FDR crushed Hoover in a landslide in November 1932. But back then, presidents weren't inaugurated until March, leaving a long, painful 4-month lame duck period. During those months, the banking system was teetering on collapse, so Hoover begged FDR to publicly support emergency economic measures to restore confidence. But FDR refused.
No.
He didn't want to be tied to Hoover's failed policies. And Hoover was furious, calling FDR's refusal to cooperate the coldest-blooded political act ever undertaken. Yikes! And then came Inauguration Day 1933, where the tradition is that the outgoing and incoming presidents ride to the Capitol together. And they did, in icy silence, barely speaking a word. The photo of them sitting stiffly in the car is legendary and painfully awkward. But the worst part? Modern historians believe this beef may have actually worsened the banking panic, since no unified action was taken in those final weeks. This wasn't just a political rivalry, it was a full-blown standoff, with the American economy caught in the middle. Man, I wish my presidents would just get along. Like Harry Truman and Dwight D. Eisenhower. Cause during World War II, Truman admired General Eisenhower so much, he offered to launch his political career. He saw Ike as a war hero with integrity, the kind of leader America could rally behind. But fast forward to 1952, and these two couldn't even fake a smile for the cameras. Because Harry Truman became furious when Eisenhower failed to defend General George Marshall from Senator Joseph McCarthy's communist conspiracy attacks. Here's the tea. George Marshall wasn't just any general. He was a towering figure in U.S. history. Chief of Staff during World War II, architect of the Marshall Plan, and Nobel Peace Prize winner. And most importantly, one of Truman's most trusted advisors. A man Truman once called the greatest American of the 20th century. But in the early 1950s, Senator Joseph McCarthy was riding a wave of Red Scare paranoia, accusing government officials of harboring communists, and Marshall became one of his targets. And this is where Eisenhower enters the picture. While campaigning in Wisconsin, Ike planned to publicly defend Marshall in his speech and stand up for a fellow general. But behind the scenes, advisors pressured Ike to cut the remarks, afraid it would alienate conservative voters who supported McCarthy. So Eisenhower kept quiet. And to Truman, this wasn't politics, it was cowardice. He unleashed a wave of public attacks on Eisenhower during the 1952 campaign, accusing him of abandoning principle for votes. And Eisenhower, who was brand new to politics, took the criticism personally, causing their relationship to completely unravel. By Inauguration Day 1953, the bad blood was obvious. But Truman extended an olive branch by inviting Eisenhower to a pre-inauguration coffee at the White House. But Eisenhower declined. So Truman was fed up, later writing that Eisenhower didn't know any more about politics than a pig knows about Sunday. However, this grudge wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous. Because the transition happened in the middle of the Korean War, and their lack of coordination delayed critical policy briefings and handoffs. Now, years later, the two eventually softened toward each other. But during that handoff, you could cut the tension with a knife. But Harry Truman didn't just clash with Eisenhower. He absolutely despised Richard Nixon with a fire of 1,000 suns, calling Nixon, and I quote, a no-good lying bastard. He can lie out both sides of his mouth at the same time. And if he ever caught himself telling the truth, he'd lie just to keep his hand in. That's gotta be the most savage line by a US president. Especially since Truman had been out of office for over 20 years. He was criticizing Nixon from his recliner. Talk about a backseat president. And Truman didn't stop there. He once said that anyone who voted for Nixon ought to go to hell. So what sparked this level of hatred? Well, Truman saw Nixon as the embodiment of everything wrong with politics. A ruthless opportunist who rose to power by smearing his opponents as communist sympathizers during the height of the Red Scare. And once upon a time, Nixon attacked Truman's administration for being soft on communism and losing China to Mao's revolution. But unlike other feuds that mellowed with age, Truman's hate for Nixon never cooled off. Even as an old man in Missouri, Truman continued to take shots at him. And when the Watergate scandal finally ruined Nixon's presidency, Truman was quietly satisfied, like he'd seen it coming all along. But you know what nobody saw coming? The time a vice president secretly plotted his boss's political extinction. Because behind the smiles of the Kennedy-Johnson White House, there was deep, simmering resentment. Back in 1960, when John F. Kennedy tapped Lyndon B. Johnson as his running mate, it wasn't out of friendship, it was strategy. JFK needed a Southern power broker to help him win votes. But once in office, the two barely tolerated each other. Johnson came from the rough-and-tumble world of Texas politics, and he never fit in with the sleek Ivy League image of Kennedy's inner circle. Especially Bobby Kennedy, JFK's brother and attorney general. LBJ privately fumed over how the Kennedys treated him, as if he were a crass backroom dealmaker in a room full of blue bloods. He even once referred to Bobby as a snot-nosed little son of a and he meant it. After JFK's assassination, Johnson didn't just take the reins. He made sure that kind of dynasty couldn't happen again. In 1967, he pushed through an anti-nepotism law, ensuring no future president could appoint family members to top government posts, a direct shot at the Kennedy family. Johnson often joked that being VP under JFK was like being a raven hovering over his shoulder, present but powerless. He felt like JFK kept him on the sideline the whole time. So once he became president, LBJ returned the favor to Kennedy loyalists and pushed them to the side. He even sneered that JFK was riding Caroline's tricycle on Capitol Hill when it came to legislation, which was Johnson's way of saying, while Kennedy looked pretty, I'm the one who actually knows how to use power. At its core, this was more than a personal beef. It was a culture war. Texas grit versus Harvard polish. But I know what you're thinking. Was Johnson's resentment just political or something more sinister? Was he connected to JFK's assassination? Well, on the day of the assassination, Johnson was in the motorcade just 2 cars behind Kennedy. And there were claims of suspicious behavior, like he reportedly ducked before the shots were fired. But after decades of declassified files, biographies, and official investigations, there's no credible evidence linking Johnson to the assassination. That's it, boys. Just keep redacting those files. Oh, hey, what are you guys doing here? But I can tell you that LBJ didn't just have beef with the Kennedys. He had beef with Nixon, too. Johnson's hatred for Nixon went even deeper than his issues with the Kennedys. He literally accused Nixon of treason. In 1968, Johnson was desperately trying to negotiate peace in Vietnam before leaving office. But behind his back, Nixon's campaign was secretly sabotaging the talks. Nixon's people were telling South Vietnamese leaders to stall negotiations, promising they'd get a better deal once Nixon won the election. When LBJ found out, he went ballistic, calling it, in his own words, treason, and said Nixon had blood on his hands. But he really wasn't exaggerating. FBI wiretaps and NSA intelligence later confirmed exactly what Johnson suspected. Nixon's team had actively interfered with the peace process. But here's another twist. Johnson didn't go public. Why? Well, because exposing Nixon's betrayal would also mean admitting that the FBI was secretly surveilling him, a political firestorm Johnson wasn't willing to ignite. So, privately, he fumed that Nixon had betrayed his country to win an election. And historians believe Nixon's sabotage prolonged the Vietnam War by years, costing tens of thousands of additional lives, all in the name of political gain, which is just crazy. And by the time Nixon won, the transition between the two men was ice cold. Nixon visited LBJ's Texas ranch, and they barely looked each other in the eye. No warmth, no reconciliation. Just two powerful men burning with mutual resentment, shaking hands for the cameras. But not all presidential feuds are fiery. Some are quiet, cold, and pretty one-sided. Because in 1980, Jimmy Carter had just suffered a brutal re-election loss to Ronald Reagan, and the country was in the toilet bowl, suffering from inflation, gas shortages, and the Iran hostage crisis. So when it came time to hand over the keys, he wasn't exactly in the mood for small talk. And Reagan didn't help either. During one high-level transition meeting, Reagan reportedly kicked back, didn't take a single note, and barely engaged. A stark contrast to Carter's famously detail-obsessed style. Carter, already frustrated, snapped at Reagan mid-briefing for not paying attention. But the real drama came from Nancy Reagan, who weeks before Inauguration Day asked if they could move into the White House guest residence early, just to start redecorating. And the Carters were flabbergasted. Excuse me, what? They found the request so presumptuous they flat out denied it, forcing the Reagans to wait like everyone else. And just when Carter thought it couldn't sting anymore, the Iranian hostages were released literally minutes after Reagan was sworn in. Carter had spent 444 days trying to resolve the crisis, and the breakthrough came as he was leaving office. Talk about a final gut punch. Ronald Reagan was like the homecoming king who made everything look easy, and Jimmy Carter was the overachiever quietly seething in the corner. So this wasn't a beef of insults or sabotage, just two different personalities passing by on their way in and out the door. Sorry, sir, I'm with this guy now. But that's nothing compared to the grudge between Barack Obama and Donald Trump, a feud so nasty that it didn't even start in politics. It started in the tabloids. Because years before Trump ran for office, he was the loudest voice behind the birther conspiracy, claiming that Obama wasn't born in the US. And even after Obama released his birth certificate, Trump kept stoking the fire, insinuating it was fake and raising doubts on talk shows and Twitter. So when Obama stepped up to the mic at the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner, he saw an opportunity to strike back and absolutely roasted Trump in front of the entire Washington elite, mocking his reality show and playing a fake birth video straight from The Lion King. Trump sat there stone-faced, almost as if to say, "I'll get my revenge one day." And some even believe it was the moment Trump decided to run for president. Fast forward to 2016. Trump wins, and it's payback time. Because he made it his mission to dismantle Obama's legacy piece by piece by repealing parts of the Affordable Care Act, withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, and ditching the Paris Climate Accords. But the insults didn't stop either. Trump accused Obama of spying on his 2016 campaign and regularly blamed him for America's problems even years into his own presidency. Eventually, Obama broke the stay silent if you're a former president tradition and fired back, calling Trump's COVID response a chaotic disaster, joking that Trump was jealous of the virus's press coverage, and quipping that if Trump refused to leave office, we might have to send in the Navy SEALs. But perhaps the most symbolic jab was when Trump refused to invite Obama to the traditional White House portrait unveiling, breaking decades of presidential decorum. 'Cause this wasn't just a feud. This created a great national divide where each side saw each other's leaders as illegitimate, dangerous, even un-American. But the rivalry didn't stop there. Because in 2020, it turned into a full-blown constitutional crisis when Donald Trump ran for re-election against Joe Biden, branding him as Sleepy Joe and accusing his son Hunter of corruption. And Biden fired back, calling Trump the worst president we ever had, and publicly questioning his fitness for office. But when Biden won by over 7 million votes, it hit the fan. Because Trump refused to accept the results, claiming election fraud, filing dozens of lawsuits, and stirring up what would infamously be known as January 6, a breaching of the U.S. Capitol by Trump's most loyal supporters. And then came Inauguration Day, where for the first time in 152 years, the outgoing president refused to attend his successor's swearing in. We haven't seen this since Andrew Johnson skipped Grant's ceremony in 1869. Instead, Trump boarded Air Force One and flew to Florida that morning, skipping the peaceful transfer of power entirely. Because unlike most presidential beefs in history, this one didn't end at the ballot box. Trump continued questioning Biden's legitimacy and affirming the election was stolen for years after. And in return, Biden called Trump's movement a threat to democracy itself. But in the end, this back and forth went far beyond insults, because the delayed transition affected everyone's ability to coordinate on the COVID-19 response. Can I take this mask off now? But hold on. If you thought Barack and Joe were BFFs, well, think again. Because behind closed doors, this duo had some serious tension. When Biden considered a 2020 run, Obama straight up warned him, "You don't have to do this, Joe. You really don't." Translation, please don't embarrass us. And once the campaign kicked off, Obama kept his distance, allegedly telling one Democrat, "Don't underestimate Joe's ability to things up." Yikes! Fast forward to Biden's re-election bid in 2024, and Obama was again underwhelmed. He didn't endorse Biden until after he'd beaten every other Democrat in the race. Meanwhile, Biden's camp was fuming. Like, where's the loyalty? But Obama kept it blunt, because years later, it was revealed that he told Biden, "Your campaign is a mess." Ugh, with friends like these, who needs enemies? And there you have it. U.S. presidents who secretly hated each other. And if you thought that was wild, wait until you see the things they actually banned from the White House. From broccoli to drones to women wearing pants. 'Cause these are the most banned items from the White House. So click this video right here, or else I'm calling the feds.